Stephen Dwyer. I'm an interior design teacher and educator here at Billy Blue. And tonight I've got the very great pleasure of speaking to some graduates, some alumni who are out there making the world a better place, one room at a time. I had the great pleasure of teaching Bree myself, so it's a great personal satisfaction for me this evening to be able to introduce you to someone who's carving their own niche within the industry and doing interesting things. So we're just going to ask a few questions of both of our graduates tonight and then throw it open to some questions from the audience and our online viewers. So let's get started. I might start with Bree and ask you, could you just give us a snapshot of the journey that you've been on since graduating, perhaps some of the highs and the lows or the challenges that you've encountered?
Yes, I'm a really good case study because I've done a lot of things since I graduated. I started with a couple of internships. From there I was then offered a job as a junior designer that I did for a year and a little bit, and then I was made redundant, which is obviously like last in is first out. So unfortunately, a few interior designers, the juniors, that can be a bit of a worry, but luckily it was not a personal decision, it was purely business. So then when they had regained their, I guess, finances, they actually hired me back, which was amazing. That was across the hospitality and commercial design. I then decided that actually I did want to be in residential, so I moved into the residential space where I actually got positioned as a senior stylist for one of the largest property styling groups in Sydney. And most recently, I've actually gotten a new job as head of interiors and product for a startup, which is very exciting. So I think I've done
You've done good.
A few things.
And it's an interesting thing that you observe. You're always going to come up against economic downturns. We've all worked through different recessions, global financial crises. It's being able to react and sort of refocus after that. Did you find, you were able to draw on some of the things you learned in this environment to sort of, maybe rebrand or look in lateral directions? Yeah,
well, what I did immediately was I knew there was an opening that they could hire me back for, which was as a drafts person. So I'd learnt drafting here at Billy Blue, and I knew that I liked it because we'd done it quite extensively. So what I did then was I actually enrolled myself in a short course to basically very, very, very quickly upskill. So I did an intensive course for a week and then went home, practiced, put together, added that to my portfolio, and then basically said, hello, I did all the things that you said I needed to do to be hired back. Here's what I can do now. And that's when they hired me back.
Excellent. Very, very wise choice. When you first enrolled and thought interior design is going to be the career for me, did you have in mind a different type of design that you would be doing, or has it matched up with what your experience has been?
It's gone like this. Yeah. I originally thought, obviously I think originally a lot of people are inspired by residential interiors, so I think that's, on the pages of Pinterest and things like that when it all starts. Yeah. And then when I actually looked into it further, I thought, I don't want to work in residential design because there's, what I thought was there's not as much skill attached. You don't need to abide by as many codes and as many, it's not as technical as something like commercial. So that's when I pushed myself to get into commercial. And then while I was there, I was like, actually, I really miss the connection to people and creating their personal spaces. So I moved back. So I've contradicted myself many times in my career.
Which is our right to do as designers. Because it's interesting feedback. Many students, many graduates have said they might have had one thing in mind. They go on the journey and maybe it's actually hospitality or commercial or even healthcare or childcare that is what fulfills them, or they find a good use of their skills. The direction you're heading in now, do you find you mentioned upskilling, you mentioned learning new things. Do you feel that learning and furthering that education is something you've had to stay on top of, even as a fresh graduate?
Yes, definitely. I think as well, there's the opportunities that may arise that you feel not equipped for. And actually, you said to me once when I was going to get an internship at Vogue Living, and I came to you after class and I said, I need to put this package together to try to get this job. It's probably the most sought after interiors internship in the country. How am I going to do it? I think I was in my second semester. And you just said, just say yes and then race around and figure it out. So that's how that's my philosophy, is anything that comes my way, if I don't have the skill set, I say yes, and then it's a mad dash behind the scenes trying to actually figure out how I'm going to execute.
You've got to be open to it, haven't you?
Yeah.
Excellent. Some very, very interesting words there. Sir, if I could engage you at this point here, speaking of that sort of thinking, you perhaps have again taken a path that has had a segue from different parts of the industry. Could you just give us a bit of background, what you graduated in, but then the journey that you've gone on, what sort of work you've been doing since graduating?
Of course. My career has, much like your career, has gone anywhere and everywhere. I actually studied the graphic design course and then weirdly enough landed a great and amazing job in architecture, and they kind of said, look, the job that we had for you at that time was working in communications and how do we market ourselves and sell ourselves, and it ended up turning into start doing signage, weirdly enough, and branding spaces, and that then took me onto this journey of what can you do with a piece of brand or communication in a physical space. And it turned into a career's pathway, I guess, into interiors. So much like I love food, so anything food-based, I will gravitate towards it with open arms. Landed another job in a company that purely focused on hospitality sector. So it was the perfect marriage of my love of food, graphics as well, and then also working in interiors, and they just kind of formed this crazy harmony of where I land now.
Excellent. You mentioned harmony, which is one of the key elements and principles, which is something we focus on greatly at Billy Blue. And of course, we're very big on design thinking, conceptual driven work, going that extra mile when it comes to the thinking and perhaps the theory behind what we eventually provide to the client. Did you find that sort of preparation allowed you to move into different directions? 100%.
I think I like to think of what happens in one industry is not a silo. It kind of works across so many other industries. So what I learned from graphics is applicable in interiors. It's the same thinking. Colour, I think, is probably one of the biggest ones that I focus on, because what you may think is a brand colour actually dictates what other people do in a space. Like, I've been privileged to work with McDonald's, and yellow and red is their primary colour. So where you kind of think with providing a space for people to actually think, and a little bit evil with buying all the cheeseburgers, but you actually used red as a cue to then go, I want a cheeseburger, and it's where you place these cues. So this thinking is applicable across so many industries, and I guess I personally find it creates great harmony when a brand and also an interior speaks together, because it just forms that holistic thinking. It forms a whole experience, really. And as design, we don't really design just beautiful things. We actually need to think about designing experiences.
My next question is for both of you, and it's sort of quite timely. Last year we had a lot of graduates emerging into the industry during the lockdown, during difficult economic times. Both of you have obviously experienced that, and those of us that have worked in the design industry for any length of time experienced those up and downs. Do you not agree that designers have pretty much got portable skills that you can recalibrate when would you agree with that sort of premise?
Yes, absolutely. I think, and that plays into the creativity that we develop as well. We can think about how to do things in different ways that someone analytical may not. So I think not even within just purely your design skills, but I think ways in terms of, how can I make myself more hireable? What can I do in terms of updating this portfolio when I've just been made redundant and I don't have the tools anymore? I think we're very adaptable and we're very fluid.
I have to agree. I have to say COVID was probably my best thing ever, as weird as that may sound.
It is surprising how many designers, graduates will give you that feedback. Yeah. It was a really, really difficult time last year, but a lot of people had positive experiences, worked on projects they may not have anticipated.
I got made redundant during that whole situation of working in hospitality, and suddenly 90% of every venue was shut down and locked out. So after redundancy, the great freak out of what I'm going to do, how I'm going to make any of this work, I started my own studio. And weirdly enough, when you're hungry for work and you're so hungry to apply thinking in different areas, you'll find that work comes to you and you'll find great success doing that as well.
Excellent. A question again for both of you, and I'm sure your experiences will be very different. Is there something you wish you'd known when you were graduating, when you were starting out, that you now know and you think that would have been valuable to know?
Many things. I think one of the biggest things to me is just to not take things personally. As creatives, we literally, is our blood, sweat and tears that go into something as simple as a design presentation. If that's met with not the cheering that you had anticipated, it actually can be extremely hurtful if you haven't built that like designer skin, you know. So I think I would just tell my student self, like, people aren't going to like your ideas all the time, and that's okay. If people like your ideas all the time, you're possibly too mainstream. So I think that's the thing for me.
Most people in the design industry will probably agree when a client says, I don't like that, it's hard not to hear, I don't like you.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
Especially
As a
when
designer.
you've spent night and day putting it together
It's
for them.
usually not something we put together in a hurry, it's something with, as you say, blood, sweat and tears. So I think once you get that, I like that designer skin, it's an armour against criticism. Once that's on, you're more trawling for feedback you can action and listening to what you can fix rather than just be aghast that they didn't get it.
Yes.
I think touching on what you said as well, for me, it's lucky enough to have worked with or studied here and worked with some really great lecturers who said, particularly in graphic design, you've got a 3-second shelf life. Don't take it personally. It's the best analogy is like a flyer with Oxfam. You know, they hand it out, you look at it, you've got 2 seconds, you've got 3 seconds, you make an impression. And for me, it was seek feedback, not criticism. And much like you can't take it personally because you're not going to cater for everyone and not everyone's going to like it, but you can try your hardest to produce something that's going to be meaningful to you and also be meaningful to someone else. So you learn to adapt and you learn not to take things personally, but you'll end up producing something great regardless of what you do.
And you also learn to sell. I feel like half the job of a designer is a sales pitch.
Absolutely. You have to not just sell your idea, but you have to sell the client's idea at the same time.
Yeah. So selling that, did you feel that's something you've gotten better at?
Yes.
Yeah. Because it's one thing presenting your work to your lecturer, isn't it? And it's another thing convincing the client to sign a rather large check.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like you show it to them, but then quickly you tell them why. Yeah. You know, so if they don't quite understand, it's like, but this is why. And then they go, oh, wow, because they like that tidbit to take away to their friend or to tell their client or the person that comes into the restaurant, you know.
It's that age-old thing of how do I add value to this? And I think part of the whole pitch thing and selling is once your client grasps onto the idea, half the work is done. All you need to do is actually do the work now.
Excellent. And of course, these guys reveal something that's heartbreaking, and really important in what we do is that our design doesn't last forever. But that just means more work for us, doesn't it? I mean, if the interior lasted 100 years, or that graphic, or that identity, or that space, or that experience was eternal, we'd work once and never again. So we have to see it as an opportunity. I wonder whether now we might have any questions from the audience at all, or any online questions that may have come since we started. No pressure. Oh, got a lady there. Thank you so much for ice breaking.
So you were saying that you moved from obviously graphic to interior. Did you upskill during that time, or did you just find it was all transferable?
A lot of thinking was transferable. Skills, absolutely. I was saying to the guys beforehand, and this is probably a lot of interior designers will hate me for saying this, but I actually did my first interiors project just using Illustrator, which is insane considering how much detail is involved. And very quickly learning off the bat, the tools that you use are going to be your best thing that you take with you. So I did quite a few short courses. I was fortunate enough to work with quite a few talented designers who said, you know what, if you teach us a bit of graphics, we'll teach you a bit of interiors as well. And I think I kind of like to live by the motto, always keep learning, always be a sponge. So definitely upskill. I think a lot of the thinking is the same. It's just thinking a little bit different and how you can apply that elsewhere.
Thank you for your question. That was very kind of you. Anybody else with a question or anything that might have popped up online?
I think
The landscape one? Yeah. So we did a question earlier online, and the question was, if you have a degree or a diploma in interior design, can you be a landscape designer? Well, you may not be qualified to be a landscape designer. There might be some things you can and can't do, but I would agree that the thinking is often going to be the same between styling, interiors, architecture, landscape as well. So if you have a strong grip on the elements and principles, you have a feel for what it is you want to do, you know what it is you want to do with a landscape, often there is overlap. You will, as a residential designer, be asked to consult on external paving, on planting, on what colour to paint the letterbox or the guttering trim. And so there is a blurring between what we do when we work in architecture and in residential and landscape. But to call yourself a landscape designer or a landscape architect, or to work solely in that, you would have to upskill, and you obviously would have to learn a lot about the tools, the raw materials that are used in landscaping, which are quite different to interiors, styling and decoration. But I think a good barometer is if you have a passion for something, it's always going to be easier to do. So, if you're drawn to beautiful things, if you love nature, if you love the outdoors, that's, to my mind, that would be half the battle won. You could learn those programs, you could intern with someone, you could start with your own garden in the same way many people start with their own interiors or their own projects at home, and then take that out into the larger industry. But landscape, what landscape designers and landscape architects do is very different to what it was 50 years ago. In the same way, maybe styling for interiors wasn't a standalone industry, or installation art was only emerging. So it's a market and an industry that's constantly changing. So I would look at, if you were somebody who wanted to enter into the landscape environment as a job within the design industry, I'd look at who's doing the best work, who's winning awards, who's getting articles written about them, who's sharing their work on social media, and what inspires you, and then break that down as to how could I learn to do what that person has done and do it my own way. That would be my answer to that question.
Awesome. We do have another question that's come from online. Any tips on building your portfolio?
Oh, very, very good question. I will throw it over to both of you because you're building your portfolio right now.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got to say that's a feature of the interior design course that I think is very valuable. I'm not sure students always realise is valuable at the time. You're forced, against your will, to put together a portfolio of all of your work, and you've got to make that work look good. And what's interesting at that perspective, at the end of your studies, is that a lot of students look back at first trimester work and just go, oh my God, it's like looking back at your finger painting or something, or a dodgy piece of pottery you made when you were in kindergarten. But we're not talking about 12 years of education, we're usually talking about 12 months of education. So it's also really encouraging that you've progressed so much. But putting that portfolio together is crucial. Showing a variety of skills and experiences, I think, as well. Even your earlier work, you can crop and edit and recontextualize in a new way. And I think it's always important to have something that stands out. So maybe there's something that you are good at that you don't necessarily see as hugely commercially viable, like you're beautiful at sketching, or you take amazing photographs, or you recycle and upcycle furniture. When I'm looking at a lot of portfolios, I'm looking for something that stands out. So I think constantly updating your portfolio, filling it with work that tells the viewer about you, about your process, about the range of skills that you've got. But I think it's also very important to be able to talk about your work, to explain to a client or an employer what they're looking at. Because you've got a lot of graduates and a lot of potential employees who've got amazing portfolios, and sometimes you wonder, what was their involvement? Or can they talk about this? Could they sell this to a client? And I know, again, students don't necessarily like standing out the front of the class and having to talk about their work. No one enjoys that at the start. But the ability to do that is crucial, because if you're asking a client to take a leap, to invest in you as a designer, and to spend usually quite a lot of money on the things that you've created, you've got to be able to convince them and to talk about your thinking. But you guys are right on top of this right now. Thoughts?
Yeah, this is like when design students or aspiring designers ask me a question, this is the most asked question. And I always say, when you're studying, take your assessments seriously. And what I mean by that is don't do them at the last second. Don't think of them as an assessment. Think of them as the resume of your first job. Because once you collate, so for example, the portfolio that Stephen's referring to is one of the last subjects, and it's a subject all about actually putting together your professional portfolio and how to do that as an interior designer. So I found that I got to the end, and because I'd taken things quite seriously, it was as simple as figuring out the layout and the configurement of what I wanted that portfolio to look like. Some of my classmates who perhaps had jumped into interior design because they were good at art in high school or weren't taking it seriously at that stage, they found themselves having rushed all their assessments. They actually had to go back, fix the assessments, and then put it in a portfolio. So my biggest piece of advice would be just do those portfolios like that is the only thing you're going to use to try to get a job. And then when the time comes, you've actually got an incredibly impressive portfolio, because people looking at it know you're a student. They don't expect you to have built and designed a restaurant. They just want to see that you've done the work and you've done it properly. That's what I would say.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. I think cheeky advantage being a graphic designer, you can make your portfolio look great with the work in other industries. Layout, very important. I like to do this exercise as well. I look back at my old work now as well and kind of look at it and cringe a little bit. No such thing as hindsight. The good thing is take your work, even from the first trimester, look at it again and treat yourself like you are the client. If I was the client, what would I want out of this? How would I revisit this? And always keep reworking, keep thinking differently. If I did this slightly different, would this have a better outcome? And don't be afraid to, I've done this many times, throw it all out again and start again. If your portfolio doesn't make you feel great, it's not going to make the client feel great. You have to be able to sell the dream and sell the dream that lives in your head, because 9 times out of 10, they will understand what that dream is.
And also actually just as a student, I think you're very aesthetically minded. Like if things look beautiful, you think that that's a success. But employers don't want to see just beautiful mood boards, because most people can put together a nice mood board. So the uglier stuff that I thought was uglier as a student, for example, like the technical drawings, are so ugly to look at to me as a student. I don't want to put that in my portfolio, but that's actually that's actually what they need to see.
A good drawing set though does make every other interior designer actually feel really happy, because if things are so accurate and so beautifully presented, like you can treat the most boring and mundane documentation set as an actual portfolio for that particular project.
Because there's a lot of feedback that we get when we show students older work. Here's Harry Seidler's drawings, here's Jörn Utzen's drawings, and they say, oh my God, they're so beautiful. And it's like, well, I think that's a really good point. If you treated your own work like that as future documents for posterity that are going to be looked at with the same sort of scrutiny, you'll always be prepared. I think in our course as well, forcing you to do it, forcing you to confront your work, actually sets you up to do it regularly, because as an industry, we're awful at it, to be really honest. You say, come for an interview, damn it, my portfolio is not up to date. No one wants to sit down at the end of a long, hard week and go, right, this weekend I'm going to bash out my portfolio, which is the last thing you want to do as graduates, actually.
Yes.
But it forces you to take it seriously and hopefully sets you up for a system or a program of doing that for the rest of your career.